My name is Giovanna Chandler, and at 70 years old, I learned that a lifetime of love could be erased by a single, practical sentence. For 40 years, I wasn't just a wife, a mother, or a widow. I was a guardian, a keeper of memories built not of brick and mortar, but of canvas, color, and the shared dream I had with my late husband, Michael. Our dream was called the Chandler Gallery. It was our home, our life's work, a private sanctuary of art that had become a quiet landmark in our city. Every painting Michael and I acquired, every sculpture we placed, held a story. The soft light filtering through the atrium windows didn't just illuminate art, it illuminated our history. After Michael passed 10 years ago, the gallery became my reason for being. The scent of linseed oil and old paper was more comforting than any perfume. The silence of the halls was a conversation with his spirit. My routine was a gentle rhythm of preservation and passion. I would wake with the sun, walk through the empty rooms with a cup of tea, and greet the masterpieces like old friends. It was a peaceful existence, a life curated with the same care as the collection on the walls. And my greatest hope, the final brushstroke on my life's canvas, was that my children, Leo and Isabella, would carry this legacy forward. Leo, my firstborn, was the sun in my sky. He was ambitious, sharp, a successful financial investor who seemed to turn everything he touched into gold. I saw Michael's drive in him, and I was endlessly proud. I believed his practical mind would be the perfect anchor for the gallery's creative soul. Then there was Isabella, my daughter. She was quieter, more artistic, a gifted art teacher who seemed to live in the shadow of her older brother's glaring success. She shared my love for the art, but not Leo's confidence. I always assumed that together, their different strengths would form a perfect whole, a yin and yang to protect their father's dream. The night it all fell apart was meant to be a celebration, the 40th anniversary of the Chandler Gallery. I had spent weeks planning every detail. The catering was exquisite, the lighting was soft and warm, and a string quartet played gently in the grand foyer. The air was filled with the low hum of appreciative conversation from friends, artists, and patrons who had supported us for decades. I felt a swell of pride looking at what Michael and I had built, a space that breathed life and beauty into the world. My plan was simple. After the main course, I would stand up, raise a glass, and officially announce that I was passing the torch. I would hand over the directorship of the gallery to Leo and Isabella, placing our shared history into their hands. I had the speech tucked into my evening bag, the words carefully chosen to convey my love, my trust, and my hope for the future. But I never got to read it. As the plates were being cleared, Leo stood up, tapping his glass for attention. He had a confident smile on his face, the one he always wore when he was about to close a big deal. His wife, Chloe, a woman whose smile never quite reached her calculating eyes, looked on adoringly. I smiled, assuming he was going to offer a toast, perhaps share a fond memory. I was so naive. He began by thanking everyone for coming, his voice smooth and commanding. He spoke of legacy, of the future, of making smart decisions. My heart warmed, thinking he was leading up to the very announcement I was about to make. Then, his tone shifted. It became colder, more corporate. "My mother and my father built something truly special here," he said, gesturing around the room. "And the best way to honor a legacy is to ensure it provides for the future." A knot of unease began to form in my stomach. This wasn't the language of art. It was the language of assets. He looked directly at me, his eyes devoid of the warmth I had known my whole life. And then he delivered the sentence that shattered my world. "That's why I am thrilled to announce that my wife Chloe and I have just finalized an agreement. We have sold the Chandler Gallery and its entire collection to the Oakhaven Development Group." The music stopped, the chatter died. The only sound in the vast room was the frantic, panicked beating of my own heart. I could feel dozens of eyes turning toward me, a mixture of shock and pity. I stared at my son, my golden boy, trying to find a trace of the child I had raised. There was none, only a stranger looking back at me. He wasn't finished. As if sensing my silent devastation, he added the final, brutal twist of the knife. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice softening into a tone of mock sympathy. "Mom," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room, "I know this is a big change, but this is just a building with old paintings. We need to be practical. Our future is more important than your past." Our future is more important than your past. The words echoed in the cavernous space, each one a hammer blow against the foundations of my life. My past wasn't just my past. It was Michael's. It was 40 years of shared laughter, struggle, and triumph. It was the soul of our family, and he had just sold it for a profit. I saw Chloe place a proprietary hand on his arm, a small, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. Isabella stood frozen near the back, her face pale with disbelief and horror. But she said nothing. No one said anything. I don't remember how I got to my feet. My body moved on its own, an automaton carrying a hollow shell. I walked through the crowd of stunned faces, up the grand staircase, and to my private apartment on the top floor. I closed the door behind me, the soft click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the silence. I didn't cry. The shock was too deep, the betrayal too absolute for tears. It felt as if the air had been sucked from my lungs, as if my very spirit had been evicted from my body. I sank onto the edge of my bed, the speech I had prepared still clutched in my hand, its hopeful words now a cruel joke. I sat there for hours, listening to the muffled sounds of the party dying down, of cars pulling away, of my life being dismantled downstairs. I finally understood. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. This was a coup, a meticulously planned takeover. The late-night meetings Leo claimed were for his firm, Chloe's sudden interest in the gallery's inventory, the subtle questions about legal ownership, it all clicked into place. They hadn't seen a legacy to preserve. They had seen a portfolio to liquidate. That night, grief was a cold, heavy blanket. But as the first gray light of dawn seeped through my window, something else began to stir within me. It was a flicker of fire in the ashes, a cold, hard clarity. They had mistaken my love for weakness. They had mistaken my trust for foolishness. They thought they could erase my past, but my past was forged in steel and stone, in the unwavering love of a man who taught me how to fight for what mattered. My son had declared war on his father's memory, and I would be damned if I let him win. The first call I made wasn't to Leo or Isabella or any of my stunned friends. It was to Arthur Vance, the family lawyer for over 50 years, a man who had helped Michael and me draft the original charter for the gallery. My hand was steady as I dialed, my voice calm and resolute when he answered. "Arthur," I said, skipping all pleasantries, "I need you to execute the legacy protocol. Effective immediately." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. The legacy protocol was a fail-safe, a legal fortress Michael and I had designed years ago for a catastrophe we never truly believed would happen. It was a provision to protect the gallery from anything market collapse, natural disaster, or, as it turned out, the greed of our own children. "Giovanna, are you certain?" Arthur's voice was laced with concern. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," I replied. The protocol was brilliant in its simplicity. It would immediately convert the entire gallery and its collection into an irrevocable trust, a living entity with one purpose, the preservation and promotion of art. I would be its lifetime trustee, its sole guardian. Upon my death, control would pass not to my children, but to a hand-picked board from the country's most respected art institutions. It was a legal move that would make the gallery untouchable, unsellable. It was a checkmate. By noon, the paperwork was signed, filed, and sealed. The Chandler Gallery was no longer a piece of real estate, it was a fortress, and I was its queen. The inevitable call from Leo came that afternoon. His voice wasn't smooth or confident anymore. It was shrill, laced with fury and disbelief. "What have you done?" he shrieked into the phone. "The deal is off. The lawyers from Oakhaven are calling it a breach of faith. You've ruined everything." I let him vent, listening calmly to the tantrum of a spoiled child who had just had his favorite toy taken away. When he finally paused for breath, I spoke, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. "No, Leo, I haven't ruined everything. I have saved it. The gallery will not be sold. That is my final decision. You made your choice, and now I have made mine." I hung up before he could respond. The silence that followed was liberating, but I knew I couldn't stay there. The house, my beautiful gallery, was now a battleground. Every room held the ghost of his betrayal. I packed a single suitcase with clothes, my sketchbooks, and a small framed photo of Michael and me on the day we first opened the gallery doors. I had another secret, a place unknown to my children. A small, light-filled art studio I had rented for myself years ago in a quieter part of the city. It was my escape, my sanctuary, where I went to paint and to simply be Giovanna, not the director, not the mother, but the artist. As I walked out of the gallery for the last time as its resident, I didn't look back. I was leaving behind the life I had known, the woman I had been. They had intended to put me out to pasture, a wealthy old woman with no purpose. Instead, they had given me one. They had started a war, and from my new headquarters, my quiet little studio, I was going to plan every single move to win it. My grief was gone. In its place was a quiet, burning rage. And it was time to let it create something new. My new studio was a world away from the polished marble and silent reverence of the gallery. It was a chaotic, beautiful mess. The large, north-facing windows were streaked with paint, and the air hummed with the smell of turpentine and possibility. Canvases in various states of completion leaned against every wall. Here, I wasn't a curator preserving the past. I was an artist creating a future. For the first time in a decade, I felt the familiar itch in my fingers, the pull to stretch a new canvas, to mix colors, to build something from nothing. This space, this glorious, private chaos, was my war room. A few days into my self-imposed exile, I took a break at a small coffee shop down the street. I was sketching in my notebook, lost in thought, when a young man's voice broke my concentration. "Mrs. Chandler?" I looked up to see a face I hadn't seen in years, though I recognized it instantly. It was Julian Vance. He had been one of the most promising students in a mentorship program I ran at the gallery a decade ago. I remembered his raw talent, the fire in his eyes. Now, that fire had matured into a steady, confident flame. He was a successful artist in his own right, his work gaining significant attention. "Julian," I said, a genuine smile touching my lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "It's so good to see you." His expression was warm, but his eyes were filled with concern. "I was so sorry to hear the news," he said, his voice low. "The rumors are flying around the art community. That the Chandler Gallery? That it's been sold." He looked at me, his sincerity a balm on my wounded spirit. "That place is sacred, Mrs. Chandler. The first time I walked through it, it changed my life. It showed me what was possible." Something in his earnestness made me trust him. I found myself telling him a sanitized version of the truth, that there had been a family disagreement, but that I had taken legal steps to protect the gallery from being sold. He listened intently, his gaze never wavering. When I finished, he shook his head slowly. "They don't understand what they were trying to throw away," he said softly. Then he looked at me, his expression firming with resolve. "You taught me to fight for my art. Now let me help you fight for yours. I know my way around social media, the modern art blogs, the new generation of collectors. They'll listen. You're not alone in this." His words, so simple and direct, were a lifeline. I had been so focused on what I had lost that I had forgotten what I had built. A community, a generation of artists like Julian, who saw the gallery not as an asset, but as an inspiration. For the first time, a flicker of hope ignited within me. Maybe I wasn't just a lonely old woman. Maybe I was a general with a hidden army. That fragile hope was tested a few days later. I was in the studio, working on a large, abstract piece, channeling my anger and sorrow into bold strokes of color, when my phone rang. The caller ID read, "Chloe, my daughter-in-law." I almost let it go to voicemail, but a cold curiosity made me answer. "Giovanna, darling." Her voice was like honey, laced with arsenic. "Leo and I have been so worried about you, disappearing like that. We just want what's best for you." I remained silent, holding the phone away from my ear as if it were contaminated. "We know you're upset," she continued, her tone dripping with false empathy. "But you don't have to live like this, hiding away in some dusty studio. You deserve to rest, to enjoy your golden years." Then came the pitch. The Oakhaven Group is very understanding. They're prepared to offer you a magnificent retirement package. A penthouse apartment overlooking the park, a travel stipend, a full-time driver. Anything you want, all you have to do is dissolve the trust. It's a win-win, Giovanna. Let us take care of the future. I could almost hear the smile in her voice, the smug satisfaction of someone who believes everyone has a price. They weren't just trying to buy the gallery anymore. They were trying to buy me, to buy my silence, my compliance, my dignity. I took a deep breath, the smell of paint grounding me. When I spoke, my voice was devoid of all emotion. My legacy is not for sale, Chloe, and neither is my dignity. The honeyed tone vanished from her voice, replaced by a sudden, sharp chill. You will regret this stubbornness, she hissed. There are other ways to get what we want. Don't say I didn't warn you. The line went dead. The warning became terrifyingly real 2 days later. There was a sharp, official knock on my studio door. Standing outside was a man in an expensive suit, holding a leather briefcase. He introduced himself as the lead counsel for the Oak Haven Development Group. He wasn't there to negotiate. He was there to deliver a threat. He handed me a thick manila folder. We are filing a lawsuit to have the trust you created invalidated, he said, his voice flat and impersonal, on the grounds that you were not of sound mind when you signed the documents. I stared at him, my blood running cold. That's absurd. Is it? He asked, raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. He tapped the folder. We have medical records. More specifically, we have a durable power of attorney for healthcare you signed over to your son, Leo Chandler, 3 years ago, which gives him significant authority over your affairs should your mental competence be questioned. My mind flashed back. I had been recovering from a minor surgery. Leo had presented a stack of papers, saying they were just standard hospital forms. I had been tired, on pain medication, and I had trusted him. I had signed without reading the fine print. It was a trap, laid years in advance. We also have sworn statements, the lawyer continued, his voice relentless, detailing your recent erratic behavior, leaving your home, isolating yourself. We are prepared to argue in court that your actions are not those of a rational person, but of an elderly woman in a state of cognitive decline, being manipulated by outside influences. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. They were going to paint me as a confused, senile old woman. They were going to use my love and trust for my son as the very weapon to destroy my credibility. They weren't just trying to take the gallery. They were trying to take my name, my mind, my very identity. You can fight this, the lawyer said, his words a final, crushing blow. But the legal battle will be long, public, and ugly. We will subpoena your friends, your doctors. Your entire life will be put under a microscope. In the end, you will lose everything. The gallery, your reputation, all of it. He left the folder on my workbench and departed, leaving a profound silence in his wake. I sank into a chair, the weight of his words pressing down on me, suffocating me. For a moment, I felt true despair. They had thought of everything. I was trapped. That night, sleep was impossible. The lawyer's words echoed in my mind. I felt small and alone, a single person against a faceless, powerful corporation and my own treacherous family. The fight felt hopeless. Just as I was about to be consumed by the darkness, my phone buzzed. It was Julian. His voice was electric, urgent. Giovanna, I found something. Something big. I had a friend, an investigative journalist who specializes in finance, look into Oak Haven Development and your son's investment firm. I sat up, my heart beginning to pound with a new rhythm, not of fear, but of anticipation. It's not just a simple real estate deal, Julian said, his words tumbling out in a rush. It's a criminal conspiracy. Oak Haven and Leo's firm have been working together for years. They have a pattern. They identify culturally significant properties owned by older individuals, create leverage, and force a sale at a drastically undervalued price. He took a breath. But this is the biggest one they've ever attempted. My friend found internal memos. They know the Chandler collection is worth at least 3 times what they offered. Their plan was never to build condos. The plan was to acquire the collection for pennies on the dollar, dissolve the gallery, and then sell off the masterpieces individually through private, unregulated auctions to a list of shady international buyers. It's a massive art laundering scheme, Giovanna, and your son is at the very center of it. The room spun. It was so much worse, so much darker than I had ever imagined. This wasn't about a family's future. It was about pure, unadulterated greed on a scale that was almost incomprehensible. My son wasn't just callous, he was a criminal. And in that horrifying realization, I found my strength. The fear vanished, replaced by an ice-cold, diamond-hard resolve. This was no longer just about protecting my husband's legacy. It was about exposing a rot that went far deeper. "Julian," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "They have been watching me. They are trying to declare me mentally incompetent." "I know," he said, his voice grim. "My friend said they are notorious for these kinds of personal attacks. They discredit their targets to invalidate any claims they might make. They will do anything to keep this quiet. We have to move fast, and we have to be smart." I looked around my studio, at the canvases filled with my rage and my hope. They thought they were going to paint a portrait of me as a crazy old woman. They had no idea I was about to paint my masterpiece, and it would be a portrait of their downfall. The next few days were a blur of clandestine activity. My studio, once a sanctuary of quiet creation, transformed into a nerve center. Julian became my field marshal. Using his network, we enlisted the help of his journalist friend and a fearsome, semi-retired art fraud investigator named Marcus Thorne, who had a legendary reputation for taking down fine art criminals. Marcus, a gruff man who communicated in grunts and sharp nods, was intrigued by the sheer audacity of Leo's scheme. While Julian and his friend dug deeper into the financial labyrinth connecting Leo's firm to Oakhaven, Marcus and I focused on the art itself. We secretly brought in two of the world's most respected, independent art appraisers. Working through the night, using my trustee keys to access the gallery, we conducted a complete, certified valuation of the entire collection. The final number was staggering, nearly 4 times what Oakhaven had offered. It was the irrefutable proof of their conspiracy to commit fraud. The weight of it all was immense, but I wasn't alone. I had an army. Yet, there was one battle I had to face by myself. One afternoon, Isabella appeared at my studio door. She looked haunted, her eyes red-rimmed and shadowed. She didn't meet my gaze as she stepped inside. "Mom," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Leo, he and Chloe, they want me to talk to you." I stood still, my brush poised over a canvas, and waited. They said if you don't drop this, they're going to release your medical records to the press. They'll have doctors testify. They're going to humiliate you, Mom. They want you to sign the papers. Just sign, and it will all be over." She was delivering their ultimatum, but her voice was hollow, filled with a despair that mirrored my own. I put down my brush and turned to face her fully. My daughter, the one who had stood by silently while her brother shattered our family. I felt a surge of anger, but it was quickly replaced by a profound sadness. I looked into her eyes, searching for a spark of the girl I once knew. "You have a choice, Isabella," I said, my voice steady and quiet. "You have always had a choice. You can stand with them, with their greed and their lies, or you can stand for what is right, for your father's memory." I held her gaze. "Who do you want to be?" For a long moment, she just stood there, tears streaming down her face. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of her decision. Then, with a choked sob, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, silver USB drive. She held it out to me, her hand trembling. "I can't do this anymore," she wept. "I can't be a part of it." Her eyes finally met mine, filled with shame and a desperate plea for forgiveness. "This is a copy of their server. It has everything. The emails between Leo and Oakhaven, the offshore account numbers, the list of buyers. It's all there. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry I was a coward." I took the drive from her hand. It felt heavy, not with data, but with the moral weight of her choice. In that moment, she wasn't the weak daughter who lived in her brother's shadow. She was the hero who had just handed me the weapon I needed to win the war. I didn't offer her false comfort or easy forgiveness. I simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the terrible, necessary thing she had done. That was a conversation for another day. Today was about justice. With the final piece of evidence in hand, our plan was set. We didn't leak the story to a single journalist. We orchestrated a symphony. I called for a special press conference on the future of the Chandler Gallery. I used my personal connections, built over 40 years, to ensure every major news outlet, every influential art critic, and every prominent member of the city's cultural scene was there. I also sent personal, non-negotiable invitations to Leo, Chloe, and the CEO of the Oakhaven Development Group. Their arrogance was their undoing. They couldn't resist the opportunity to be seen as the new titans of the art world. They walked right into the lion's den. The grand foyer of the gallery was packed. Cameras flashed, reporters murmured. Leo and Chloe stood near the front, looking smug and triumphant. They thought this was my surrender. I walked to the podium, not as a frail, confused old woman, but as the director, the guardian, the queen of this domain. I was calm, my voice amplified by the microphone, clear and strong. I began, not by talking about betrayal, but by talking about legacy, about what art means to a city, to a culture. Then, I shifted. However, I said, my eyes finding Leo in the crowd, a legacy is not a commodity, and a cultural institution is not a corporate asset to be stripped and sold for parts. On a massive screen behind me, the first document appeared, the certified independent appraisal of the collection, showing its true value next to Oakhaven's insultingly low offer. A gasp rippled through the room. Then, I detailed the art laundering scheme, my voice cold and precise. I explained how they planned to defraud our family and the art world. The screen behind me began to scroll through the emails from Isabella's USB drive. Leo's name, Chloe's name, Oakhaven's name, all there in black and white, plotting, conspiring. I saw the color drain from Leo's face. Chloe looked like she was going to be physically ill. The CEO of Oakhaven was already backing toward the exit, only to be met by two plainclothes detectives that Marcus had tipped off. They did not just try to steal a building, I declared, my voice ringing with 40 years of righteous anger. They tried to erase a cultural history for profit, and as part of their strategy, they attempted to silence me by declaring me mentally incompetent. I paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. Today, I am here to tell you that my mind has never been clearer, and my resolve has never been stronger. I concluded by announcing that all of the evidence had been turned over to the District Attorney's Office and the IRS Art Fraud Unit. And then, for the final, triumphant act, I revealed my true plan for the future. The Chandler Gallery will not be sold, I announced. Instead, effective today, it will be reborn. It is now the Chandler Foundation for Emerging Artists, a non-profit organization dedicated to discovering and supporting the next generation of talent. Its new executive director will be an artist whose integrity and vision I trust completely, Mr. Julian Vance. The room erupted in applause. It was a complete and total victory. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was catastrophic for my enemies. Leo and his associates were arrested, facing a mountain of federal charges. Their assets were frozen, their reputations shattered. Chloe filed for divorce, trying to distance herself from the inferno. Their gilded world had crumbled into dust. The lawsuit to have me declared incompetent was unceremoniously dropped. My relationship with Leo was over. The son I had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger whose greed had consumed him. With Isabella, things were more complex. Her act of courage was the first step on a long road toward rebuilding trust. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, it felt possible. But my healing didn't come from their downfall. It came from what grew in its place. The Chandler Gallery, now the Chandler Foundation, was alive in a way it had never been before. The quiet, reverent halls were now filled with the vibrant, chaotic energy of young artists. Julian, true to his word, transformed it into a dynamic hub of creativity. There were workshops, exhibitions, and loud, passionate arguments about art that echoed through the rooms. My life found a new rhythm. I was no longer the sole guardian of the past, but a mentor to the future. I spent my days at the foundation, not as a director, but as a guide, sharing my knowledge, my stories, and my passion with a new generation. I had found my true legacy. It wasn't in the paintings on the wall, but in the hands of the artists who would create the masterpieces of tomorrow. I had lost a son, but I had gained a family, a loud, messy, brilliant family of creators. And as I walked through the sunlit atrium, watching a young painter stare at her first exhibited work with tears of joy in her eyes, I felt a sense of peace that was deeper and more profound than any I had ever known. I was Giovanna Chandler, and I was finally home.